Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm Dr. Harshit. Today as my guest I have my good friend and colleague Dr. Mansi. Hi Mansi, how are you?
Hi, Dr. Harshit. How are you? What's up? I'm good.
So Mansi is a budding pathologist. She has also worked in blood banks and she is familiar with blood products. How does the market for blood work and basically the scarcity of blood in our country. So the idea for this podcast generated when we were having a talk about how even in Tier 1 cities and even in Bangalore, you do have a scarcity of blood where the supply is not able to catch up with the demand. And still a lot of people have to wait for blood and it is very difficult to arrange blood and get blood products even in emergency circumstances.
Yeah, I agree with you, Harshit. To quite an extent, that is true. The scarcity of blood we have been facing in our blood banks, especially from the Department of Surgery and Obs-Gynae, as there is high demand and the supply or the substitute of the whole blood is really less. And as we expect, a replacement of the whole blood that we are dispatching should be there, but it's not as to expected number.
I think the problem of scarcity of blood has been there for a long time. I think for the last 50, 60 years when we realized that human blood is a good substitute for human blood basically and have stopped using other products to replace human blood. And we have now been able to safely extract blood and give it to the recipient. In Mansi, as from my experience and as I think was the case all over the country, in the pandemic, the people who voluntarily donated were quite low. And because of that, a lot of surgeries had to be postponed. A lot of people who really needed blood were not able to get it. So how true was that in your place?
That was true, as we had seen that, of course, due to this phobia of COVID spread, of course, hospital admissions had reduced and quite a lot of hospitals had been converted into COVID-only hospitals. And all the planned surgeries were pushed to an extent where it is not an emergency or like an emergency surgery. So all the elective surgeries were postponed for quite a long time. And because of that reason also, replacement of the whole blood was not there. I totally agree that COVID-19 has severely affected even the blood substitute department.
Mansi, could you shed a little light on where do we normally use blood? What is it? Do we use it? Or basically, in a very short 2-3 line introduction on what is the need for blood?
Yeah, so mostly it's not a whole blood. I would like to shed some light on this aspect also, that not whole blood is always transfused. It's packed RBCs, packed red cells that are transfused. And because from the whole blood, we can also separate platelets, serums, coagulation factors, and pure red cells. So that is how also the substitutes can be given. Most commonly, substitutes are given for chronic anemias, severe anemias, or road traffic accidents. And in surgeries, of course, where there are major surgeries, there we need 2-3 blood bags extra during the surgery. So these are the conditions where we most commonly require the blood substitutes, where the clinician performing surgeon will be asking us for the blood substitutes.
So basically, you need blood in a lot of conditions, but you are not able to get it. So there's a mismatch between supply and demand. And during COVID, it was exaggerated. And even though we don't use all of the blood in a lot of things, we use certain components. And that too, there's a scarcity. And we also have to take into account blood group matching. And we also have to
right.
we also have to take into account screening for diseases and everything else. So basically, we have a very constrained supply and a demand that is quite large and we are not able to fill it.
Totally, I agree. Totally.
So basically, because of that constrained supply and because of that mismatch, there's a huge paucity of blood. And in our country, because we do not allow the organizations, the hospitals, the people who are collecting blood, who want the blood to compensate the donor. So a lot of people, which I think we have a potential of reaching out to, which I think will come forward if they're in some way compensated for their time, their effort, and for basically their blood, not blood and sweat, only blood. So for basically their blood. So because of that, we are missing on a lot of people who we could save, who we could give blood to. And because our regulations don't allow compensation with respect to blood, so there's a huge undersupply, which basically our regulations have artificially constrained. In certain countries, in the US, for instance, you're allowed to get certain money if you give blood. So that sort of works like an incentive, and that also helps a lot of people to come forward, basically be able to give blood. If I would have to miss a day of work and I am paid on for the work I do, I don't think I would be very interested in missing a day, going to hospital, standing in lines, waiting for my chance, getting my blood drawn and coming back and not being compensated for any of it. So it becomes very difficult if we don't allow people to get money basically.
Oh, just about this point, Harshit, I would like to add this thing that this has been followed in India as well, but not very recently. Some 20 to 30 years back, when certain donors in certain part of India, certain parts, villages or districts of India were paid for the blood substitutes. But this, in fact, was taken as a opportunity for people of the lower socioeconomic status as a method of earning, as a mode of earning. So I would like to tell that for the interval between two consecutive blood donation, minimum time period of 3 months is necessary for the replenishment of the RBCs that have hemoglobin or RBCs that have been donated. So people that time used to not follow the given time period of 3 months, and they used to donate frequently. That in turn used to be proven as a hazard for their own health. So this in our country, like in our setup of a developing countries, this could have been taken as an opposite way, like a bad way of earning as well.
Yeah. That is a valid sort of like adverse effect of this policy. But we could look at how certain countries who allow money in exchange for blood are doing this. Maybe some way of keeping track of when you have donated blood and when are you eligible for the next time. But that also depends a lot on state capacity, on government regulation and everything else. But as long as we are not able to get a substitute like artificial blood, some substitute which we are able to infuse instead of depending upon people's sort of like goodness of heart and them coming forward, we won't be able to get past this problem. Mati, how far are we from maybe artificial, to use this term loosely, artificial blood?
I believe this is not such an easy job at such a huge country, such a huge population of ours. At least a decade or two we're away from it. Because artificial blood is nothing but it has a hemoglobin, laboratory made hemoglobin that has a oxygen carrying capacity. So it has its merits, it has its demerits. Its merits include that it is ready to use as it is laboratory based. Then there is no refrigeration required. It is universally accepted. There is no requirement of cross matching. There are no problems of mismatching. But also there are demerits. For example, availability is not as much as is required currently. And it has a shorter lifespan, shorter half life. It has high, itself found oxygen capacity is high. And so basically, majorly, it is less available. It's not readily available. It's not readily made as of now. And it will take almost around a decade because this is actually now in process. Studies are being conducted over it, and technology has been.
So, to simplify that, we have certain components which are able to replace certain functions of blood. And what I understand, it's very expensive. It is not readily available. And only certain functions can be replaced. We don't have a good substitute for like the whole blood we use. So from what I have, I think from our last discussion, we and what you said right now, we are at least good 10-20 years away from commercially available artificial blood, which you can take out of the fridge and give it to the patient. So the supply demand mismatch will be there. And I think in India, at least add a decade to that number. So at least 20-30 years, maybe till 2050 or 2055, we would have that supply demand mismatch and we would be having paucity of blood in our country. So, on that note, let me take a short break and listeners will come back to you. Welcome, listeners. Welcome back. So, we were talking about the economy of blood, we were talking about blood substitutes, we were talking about the market of blood. Going on a little tangent here, I would like to talk about breast milk. So commercially available breast milk. So Mansi, do you know that in India now breast milk can be sold?
Yeah, I know about it. I have read about it under the Ayush scheme, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, under the Ayush license. Now breast milk can be sold under the Ayush license, and it's sort of a little misuse of the license, but I think all the things sold on the Ayush license are misuse, so that's right. So yeah. So Mansi, what do you think are the problems with breast milk? Commercially selling of breast milk.
Yeah, the same issues somewhere we had with the issuing of blood substitutes. We well know that breast milk substitute isn't that common. Like it's called exclusive breastfeeding for a reason.
Yeah, so we promote exclusive breastfeeding. We know it is the best for the child. We know if we give the child for 6 months anything else than breast milk, the child is now at a higher risk of infections. He is not getting proper nutrition and all other range of problems. So I think that this is the same case as with blood because we have a demand, because we now advocate for exclusive breastfeeding. The people who use surrogates, they want breast milk. Females who are not able to feed the child all the time, who are working or who are working in certain conditions where they cannot take leaves and feed their child, or females with certain disorders in which they are not able to produce breast milk or produce breast milk in sufficient quantity. So because there's a demand and the demand has risen over the past years because of all these factors, there are similar problems as we face with blood.
Yes, as far as I know, wherever I have referred, I have seen, I have read the cost is also high. If I have to put out figures, it is somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 for just about 30 to 40 ml, the frozen milk. And this certainly, I don't think does the justice. What do you think?
So the cost is obviously out of the reach for a lot of people, because some at a time the baby would be having somewhere around 150 to 200 ml. So the cost is obviously high and it is out of reach of a lot of people and a lot of infants who need this milk. But because of the market conditions and because there's such restriction on the supply side and the demand is so high, the price has now fixed at such a high point and it is out of reach of a lot of people. So this is the case in a lot of markets. So for instance, take the example of the black marketing for organs. So because there's a demand for organs and donations in India are not able to meet that demand, and they are not like nowhere near to meet that demand. And because there's a demand and the supply does not meet the demand, and the trade is somewhat illegal, there exists a black market, and that in that too the rates are very high. For instance, if you want on the black market to get a kidney and you unfortunately you are in the rarer blood groups, the cost of acquiring the kidney, not of the transplant and everything else, runs somewhere in lakhs. And this is somewhere around 10, 20, 30 lakhs, depending on how you source it and everything. So, because of all these factors, and because there is a need for regulation, because we want to protect the vulnerable population, we don't want people being forced, maybe financially, maybe because of disinformation, maybe because of being coerced into selling their organs. And because we have a lot of people in poverty, we don't want that to happen. So there is a need for regulation. But because of that need for regulation, there is a black market which has been created. And yeah, so this, I think this exists across a lot of sort of like bodily, what do you call them, organs, you can call them organs, bodily organs or blood or breast milk, because there are no substitutes for them. There's a demand and the supply is severely restricted.
Yeah, I think whatever you said was made sense to quite an extent. And this was a topic to to be spoken about, like to be talked about. I think it was a good discussion.
Yeah, I think we did talk about a lot of aspects and we did talk about a lot of things. So, bringing this discussion to a close, thank you, Mansi, for being here. Do you have any closing comments?
Thanks to you for having me, Harshit. It was a good experience, knowledgeable talk. And yeah, I just would want to say ki everybody should donate blood at least once in 6 months. As we all know, the guideline says not more than 3 months gap should be there. And yes, as far as I want to convey through this talk, I think we did. Lastly, I would just say ki everybody should be aware of blood donation. Everybody should donate. And as we all know, the guideline says 3 months, the at least 3 months duration should be there between two consecutive blood donations. So if every individual plans to donate blood even twice a year, I think that will be very beneficial for the population. The availability of replacement blood would be easy.
Yeah, I think that is an important message to pass through. So, if you are healthy and you weigh somewhere more than 50 kilos, you can donate every 3 months. We urge you to donate so that this supply demand mismatch can be managed. And unless we get good blood substitutes, there should be no need for the black market. We can eliminate this black market. So, thank you, listeners, for listening to us. Thank you, Mansi, for being here. Okay, bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.